listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Yesterday, Oasis announced Australian dates for their massive 2025 reunion tour.
I know my brother better than anybody else.
When both come together, you have greatness.
But don't look back in anger, I heard you say.
And for fans looking back in anger at the surprise dynamic ticket pricing for some UK dates, the band announced there would be no dynamic pricing for the Australian leg of the tour. But what exactly is dynamic ticketing and why is it being widely criticised?
You have that emotional connection and you're willing to do whatever it takes. And you often have that split-second countdown timer happening and you're like, I've only got 2 minutes to decide, do I want to spend $1,000 or do I want to miss out?
That conversation is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, it's time for the headlines with Antoinette Lattouf. Today's Wednesday, October 9.
G'day, Sasha. Hello, everyone. Anthony Albanese has issued 2 apologies in Parliament over a comment he made during question time yesterday that was considered ableist.
The idea that we're... Have you got Tourette's or something? You just sit there, babble.
So he made the comments in response to Liberal frontbencher Angus Taylor calling out, rule it out, rule it out, rule it out over negative gearing and tax changes to owner-occupied homes. So the PM immediately withdrew his comments and issued a quick apology. He then returned to a near-empty Parliament at 8 p.m. last night where he had this to say.
It shouldn't have happened. And I also want to apologise to all Australians who suffer from this disability. I regret saying it. It was wrong. It was insensitive. And I apologise.
Yeah, so this second apology was picked up by Sky News, which has a live feed of Question Time, and that is how we came to know that he'd made this second apology after initially immediately withdrawing those comments on the floor of Parliament. He did come back to address it again. And to explain what Tourette syndrome is, to give some background, it is a disorder that involves repetitive movements or unwanted sounds or tics that can't easily be controlled. And there was quite a bit of backlash online. While he did immediately apologise, there was, time for people to respond, people with their own experiences of Tourette's, saying that to hear the Prime Minister of Australia make those comments about something that is, a disorder was pretty on the nose.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been a lot of movies in recent years where like a funny, silly character has Tourette's, and that's been really damaging for people who live with that condition. I do, though, think that Anthony Albanese handled it pretty well. He acknowledged it on the spot when he said it. He withdrew it. And I think it was important that he returned to address it again because this sort of language creeps into everyday speech and we all have a duty to pick ourselves up on it and correct it.
Florida is bracing for the impact of Hurricane Milton, which is threatening to make landfall as a life-threatening Category 5 storm. US President Joe Biden has issued a statement urging people living in the path of the hurricane to heed evacuation warnings, saying it could be the worst storm to hit the state in 100 years. Tampa Bay is in the firing line to cop the worst of Milton, with its 400,000 residents told to leave. Now, the mayor of Tampa, Jane Castor, did not mince her words when talking about how dire the situation is on CNN.
If you choose to stay in one of those evacuation areas, you're going to die.
Yeah, wow. That's as direct as he can be. And thousands of people have heeded that warning to leave, causing long traffic queues on highways. Milton is tipped to make landfall on Wednesday, Florida time. So that'll be tomorrow for us. And the storm is heading to areas already impacted by Hurricane Helene, which hit on September 26. And that was a Category 4 hurricane, and that killed at least 230 people. And sadly, bodies are still being retrieved.
Yeah, and forecasters, it's been quite remarkable to hear how they're speaking about Milton. One tweeting that they're at a loss for words to describe the storm's small eye and how intense it was going to be. He said, the hurricane is nearing the mathematical limit of what Earth's atmosphere over this ocean water can produce. So that's where, 1 in 100 year storm is coming from. It's potentially going to be extremely devastating.
The There are concerns Australia's supermarket wars are back. So if you don't remember, back in 2011, there was a huge backlash towards Coles and Woolies over their milk pricing because they slashed the cost of their generic brands to just $1 a litre. And at the same time, they were underpaying our dairy farmers. So non-branded milks have just hit their lowest price since 2011 at the two major supermarkets. So they now sit at $1.55 per litre, as opposed to $1.60, sparking fears in producers that the milk price wars could be returning. So Australian dairy farmers, they're the peak body for dairy farmers, they've told the ABC that retailers for a long time have viewed milk as a discount leader, which is a cheap item that draws in customers. But both Coles and Woolies say they've not changed anything they're paying farmers, but dairy farmers say that the margins are really, really tight and it's putting a lot of pressure on farm management and that any future price wars could have devastating consequences on the industry.
Like 5 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but dairy farmers are saying it is a significant discount that, like you said, tightens their margins, and that then inevitably puts more pressure on them. And this, of course, is all coming at a time when the ACCC is hyper-fixated on the supermarkets and what they're doing. They're facing legal action currently from the consumer watchdog over pricing practices. So, it's more scrutiny for Coles and Woolies. It's worth noting Aldi kept their prices firm at $1.60 for a litre. Coles and Woolies have dropped their prices.
Who's gonna make the gravy now? I bet it won't taste the same. Just that flour, salt, a little red wine. Don't forget $1 for tomato sauce for sweetness and that extra tang.
Yes, it is the song that inevitably brings up memories of an Aussie Christmas, and some exciting news has dropped today about Paul Kelly's iconic 1996 hit. The first trailer for the movie version of How to Make Gravy has dropped. It'll follow the stories of a number of characters that are mentioned in the tune, and of course it'll focus in on Joe, a newly imprisoned man spending his first Christmas in jail away from his family.
It's easy to get sucked into a lot of useless shit in here. But at some point you realise you'd rather have a life.
Oh, emotional. How to Make Gravy drops on Binge on December 1, Antoinette.
I don't know how un-Australian I am, but I have never heard that song.
Oh, no.
Nor have I ever had gravy at Christmas.
Okay, well, I have both, so I can tick those. I hit the Aussie Christmas mark. I'm very bogan and boring.
You can keep your Aussie passport. It's just, I guess it depends on what your family traditions are, and obviously, with my cultural background, gravy is not something that we make. We make hummus and baba ganoush and toum. I've literally never heard that song. But it is very nostalgic for a lot of people, and
yeah, it's a beautiful song. It's I would say.
Do you hear my skepticism in my voice? I'm like,
it's great. No, it is.
I'm like, how to make gravy? Isn't it just the Gravox box and you tip it in and you add a bit of hot water?
Didn't you listen to the words? You got to add the tomato sauce for tang. You got to put the red wine in.
Yeah,
you got to add the flour. There's a whole lot of steps to making gravy. Now, as a true blue Aussie gal, I grew up eating gravy at Christmas time. We'd have a roast of some description and there would be gravy poured on it. It was just out of the box though, Antoinette. I will admit it. But,
shame.
Yeah, I know. Oh, bad. Maybe this year we'll listen to Paul Kelly's track and we'll actually do it. But yeah, this is one of those songs that it's kind of become a cult song almost later. Like it's developed and then people got obsessed with the characters, which is what this movie is going to follow. And the fact that it's coming out on December 1, it's been a long time since we've had an Aussie Christmas movie. So I'm excited for a new classic. I'm going to watch it. Very Boy Swallows Universe vibes as well I got watching the trailer. So give it a go if that's your cup of tea or cup of gravy, as it may be. Antoinette, thanks so much for joining us for the headlines. Next up, we're doing a deep dive into dynamic ticket pricing, what it means and why it's unfair.
Hey, Bension here. Well, it looks like Oasis won't be making fans pay a bunch more at the checkout for their 2025 reunion tickets. Not in Australia, at least.
You're my
The Gallagher brothers faced a massive backlash over dynamic ticket pricing for the UK leg of their tour. But yesterday they announced that even though dynamic ticket pricing was, quote, a useful tool to combat ticket touting and actually helps lower prices for fans, the ticket price they advertise for their Australian shows will be the price you actually pay at checkout. Dynamic ticket pricing is a bit like surge pricing on Uber. The more people want it, the higher the price automatically climbs. And while some might argue artists should automatically earn more money when shitloads of people want to see their show, others see it as a kind of automatic price gouging, or in-house ticket scalping, if you like, that forces fans to pay much more than they expected as that dreaded timer counts down. So does this decision from Oasis prove consumers have the power to fight back against dynamic ticket pricing, or are we going the way of America, where it's the norm for all major events? Dr. Georgia Carrol is an expert in fan culture and has a PhD in fan and celebrity studies from the University of Sydney. Georgia, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tell us, how long has dynamic ticket pricing been a thing in Australia?
So dynamic ticket pricing refers to when in periods of higher demand, ticket prices, specifically on Ticketmaster, increase, much like you have Uber surge pricing or when you're trying to book an airfare at an expensive time. So it's the same premise of supply and demand. It's been in Australia for a couple of years. We've seen it for things like the Australian Grand Prix and the Australian Open, but we've really noticed it with music just this year and especially in recent months.
All prices in a capitalist economy are about supply and demand. Obviously, we're used to it with things like Uber and buying flights. So what's wrong with making supply and demand real time in that way through dynamic ticket pricing?
The argument is, with, say, Uber, they can put more cars on the road or the demand will die down. But with a concert or a sporting event, we already know how many seats there are. That supply is not going to increase at any stage. And arguably, the promoters know that demand is going to be there. And so it becomes a bit of a price gouging is the argument a lot of fans use, where it's all known and so they just put up the price for the sake of it. They might have had, a pre-sale sign up where they can see how many fans have registered for a pre-sale. They might have had a concert in another country and seen the demand. And so it's just an excuse to increase their profit margin because they know it's going to be popular, and it's not generally just they'll increase it for a set period of time. It'll be as soon as a certain number of tickets are sold, the rest of the tickets will be sold at that higher price permanently.
Does it ever work in the other direction, in the sense that there's not enough people buying the tickets so the price actually reduces?
So it's not an official system in the same way that the dynamic or in-demand pricing is, but I think a lot of people will have experienced, it's getting closer and closer to the day of a concert and there's lots of empty seats. And so the promoter will announce that, tickets are not on sale, but there's a new batch of tickets released for much lower than you paid for it. I experienced that at a concert earlier in the year where I'd paid $250 for my ticket thinking there was going to be high demand, and tickets on the day were being sold for $75. So you do see it, but unfortunately it's not with these artists where the dynamic pricing is turned on, because they will be the ones that sell out at the higher prices.
Ultimately, it does kind of raise the question, what is the actual value of a ticket?
And that's the argument, because these tickets sell and the fans buy them at these prices. We've seen that with the Oasis story in the UK, even though they're not doing the dynamic pricing in Australia. We've seen that for the fans who are willing to spend $1,000 on the Taylor Swift VIP tickets. Again, not dynamic pricing, but showing the value of how much a ticket costs. And we have happening right now, the Grand Prix tickets on sale. They were announced, the most expensive ones at being $600. They're selling for over $1,200 through dynamic prices. And they're selling out instantly because fans don't want to miss out. And that's what these are taking advantage of. It's taking advantage of the fact that you want to be there, you have that emotional connection, and you're willing to do whatever it takes. And you often have that split-second countdown timer happening, and you're like, I've only got 2 minutes to decide, do I want to spend $1,000 or do I want to miss out? And so for a lot of fans, you just make that decision, and that kind of tells the company that fans are willing to pay this and furthers the market cycle.
We have pretty strong anti-scalping laws in most Australian states. If the problem with scalping is someone buying up to 50 tickets and reselling them at a much higher value, is dynamic ticket pricing kind of like a different kind of scalping where the band and the organisers benefit rather than some bastard on the street?
Yeah, that's the argument that gets made, especially by fans, especially because the in-demand pricing model through Ticketmaster, the wording that Ticketmaster releases is that it's a way to prevent scalping, and they say it's a way to get these tickets in the hands of real fans. But it is just selling them, for these crazy prices through this legal channel. And it is that way. And yes, the argument is that the money is going to the performer, to the organisation, rather than to this third-party scalper. But it is still at an increased price in the same way that a scalper would be. So the fan is losing either way. But yes, the artist is technically earning that extra money versus the scalper on the street. But that's the only difference. It's no different to the fan.
When there was this big backlash in the UK to dynamic pricing for Oasis specifically, they said that the band's management and Ticketmaster had met and they talked about it and they thought it would be really fair. But then, surprise, surprise, there's a lot of demand for Oasis tickets. Is that credible, that story?
I would say absolutely not. I think they were betting on the fact that there wouldn't be as much backlash as there was. And that's always the hope, because the thing with dynamic or in-demand pricing is the organiser, the management, somebody involved with the artist has to opt in. It's not opt out. And the argument is that, they're just hoping the fans will just be so desperate that they'll happily pay. Whereas, you wouldn't see these same arguments if, say, they had just announced the tickets were being on sale for $100 extra, say. Fans would be like, oh, it's expensive, but I'm going to pay that, versus thinking it's going to be $100 and going in and paying $200 because of this surge. And that's when fans feel taken advantage of. But yeah, they knew the demand was going to be there. They knew that it was going to surge, and then they just had to try and cover their backs, and now they're not doing it for the rest of their tour. So lucky US and us, I guess.
How powerful is a backlash like this? Do you think there's a chance that this could be a turn of the tide for this kind of practice in general? Or do you think that basically we're going towards a world in which, like America, for example, you're expecting there to be dynamic ticket pricing for any major event?
It's a hard one to know. Again, using the Grand Prix as an example, just because it is happening right now and their comment sections across all social media are being obliterated by fans really angry at this practice. I will be surprised if they say turn it on again next year. I think the backlash for them has far outweighed any additional payment that they will make. The problem is, as we kind of touched on earlier, even when fans are mad about it, they're still paying. And if it is something, so the Grand Prix, the Australian Open, they happen year after year. Fans can kind of be like, I might not go this year because dynamic pricing is turned on. I'll go back next time if they turn it off. You don't know when Oasis is coming back. You don't know when a big musician might come back. And so if they're using it, it's a lot harder for fans who feel those connections to be brave enough to not purchase. They will get angry online, and there will be that, reputational backlash to the organisers. But the fans and that uncertainty of not knowing when that opportunity will occur again, they're still going to purchase. And that kind of creates that cycle where I don't think we're ever going to end up in a spot with these big artists where the fans will stop buying to the point where it makes a difference.
Especially when you've got that ominous ticking down of the 10 minutes that you have to buy it.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, that it might cause some problems in the music industry going forward if some artists, like Oasis, refuse to use dynamic ticketing, but others don't? Could it start to look like some artists, Green Day, care less about their fans than others do? Yeah,
and that kind of then becomes this question of who is turning it on, why are they turning it on, what is the benefit. The only way we'll see real change is if the backlash kind of occurs, I think, to somebody like Ticketmaster enough that they stop the practice. I don't think they'll ever do that, but I think if we leave it on the hands of the individual artist, they're going to have enough individual fans where it's not going to move the needle on a huge scale. So I had friends who were really upset about the Green Day ticketing, but then other friends didn't know they were even touring, let alone that there was dynamic ticketing drama. So you need something that kind of cuts through And that's where Oasis kind of, I think, happened on that kind of global scale. But Taylor Swift didn't turn it on and she was sold through Ticketek in Australia, so it's a bit different. But you would need somebody of her kind of status to make a big public statement. Otherwise, everybody's just going to be upsetting their own pockets of fans, but it's not going to create any kind of widespread change because it's all happening in little pockets.
Is there a big role for government here? Because obviously anti-scalping laws weren't always there. Could we see laws that say, actually, you can't dynamically increase the price by 250% on the day?
I think that's going to be interesting. At the moment, the ACCC has said that as long as it's kind of announced in advance and is clear to fans that it's going to be turned on, it all kind of is acceptable. I think maybe if you have a kind of enough people in the government that suddenly start facing these issues, like we saw people speaking out about missing out on Eras Tour tickets, and it got kind of on government radar that way. You need, a big Green Day fan in the government to start petitioning. But unfortunately, under like current rules, it isn't illegal or, problematic as long as they have the fine print. It's not ethical. But I just can't see in the short term how it's really beneficial, I guess, for the government to be getting involved, or that they would see it on the same level, because technically the money is going to the artists and the organisations. But it'll be interesting. And I think, the more this is in the news and the more we're talking about it, the more maybe they'll look at it. But for now, unfortunately, as long as that fine print is there, not much we can do.
Right. So we need a seething Anthony Albanese not getting his Green Day ticket to change the law. That would be how it would change. Finally, we've seen plenty of festivals and major events cancelled in recent years because people aren't buying enough tickets. And there's been this big narrative that festivals in particular, but concerts of any kind, are kind of dying. Could dynamic ticket pricing put off so many fans that it's a nail in the coffin for the industry, or could the extra revenue save it?
It's a hard one because, unfortunately, a lot of these smaller, some of the festivals are quite big, but it's a smaller scale to something like an Oasis tour or an Eras tour or a big stadium tour, where you have, a couple of 100,000 people who are buying the tickets for those nights. Like a festival has those, like a lot of smaller artists, and often involves camping and accommodation. And that's often what you'll hear in the surveys of why people aren't going to these events. It kind of is just a bit more complicated on a few levels, or they would rather, in the cost of living crisis, invest in one big artist that they really love versus a lot of medium-sized artists that they kind of love. Firstly, that means that something like a festival is not going to be really impacted by this dynamic ticketing because it's all just going to these big stadium shows. So it really isn't an issue that's affecting the ticket sales over there. But it also, on the flip side, could mean, fans who are getting annoyed at these big stadium shows, if they are constantly saying, I can't, go to this artist because they're putting on dynamic pricing. I don't want to go to the Grand Prix because they've got dynamic pricing. I don't want to go to the Australian Open. Oh, suddenly I've got this money left over that I thought I was going to spend over there. How about I come over here? It'll be a bit of a wait and see to see if that happens. Because I think at the moment we are still seeing the big stadium shows, like Olivia Rodrigo's in town this week. Those are selling out so quickly because that's what fans are wanting to see, and they've seen them in America and in England, the tours, and they want to see it here. But I think that's the potential, that they say no to the things that do have dynamic pricing and then use the spending money across at the smaller scale artists who aren't turning on the dynamic pricing, who have the cheaper venues still. But it's a bit of wait and see if that's going to actually happen.
Georgia, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Dr. Georgia Carrol there. She's an expert in fan culture with a PhD in fan and celebrity studies from the University of Sydney. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it, and hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. If you want to keep up with our other content, we're on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube at Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
Listener.